Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, points his finger at countries like Australia for being laggards in this. We're the ones to blame, apparently, for the whole thing not going according to plan. Yet it seems to me they've got a real problem here with process, the process he resides over. But for example, the exemption that applies to China and India and other so-called developing countries, for instance, I think at least until 2030, they're not required to keep within emissions targets, which means all the world's carbon-intensive industries sort of moved to those countries, and it's done there. It seems to me to be, in that sense, a process that's never going to achieve what it wants to achieve and reduce emissions. Is that right? They've got to look at the way this thing is constructed in the first place.
Look, much like the UN itself, and more broadly, it suffers from that fatal flaw that a small or emerging country has in many ways the same status at the table as large countries, countries that contribute a lot, countries that are technologically advanced or doing their bit. To say that Australia bears a disproportionate burden of this is, I think, really ill-informed. Even under the coalition, Australia's emissions accounted for far less than 1% of the world's carbon emissions. So we can't get carried away with Australia's role in climate change, even if one is an absolute enthusiast for the concept. Now, it is absolutely right what you say, that to have a structure that allows a free pass for large, wealthy and let's face it, high-emitting countries like China doesn't just not move the needle as a globe, but it means that things get locked into a war of pointed fingers rather than in a constructive working together. In many ways, it's the same problems that plague the human rights aspects of the United Nations. It's the same problems that plague the Security Council and ultimately multilateralism as a whole.
Yeah, more than ever before, it seems to me, this COP conference, COP27, appears to be off in a world of its own. You know, the real world challenge on energy is the one that Europe's facing now and other countries to a lesser extent. The problem that the renewable energy policy to date has not been a replacement for hydrocarbons, which they're having to import from Russia and then now can't import, hence the crisis. And yet none of that reality seems to be under discussion at Sharm el-Sheikh. There's no discussion, or very little discussion, of the word nuclear, for instance, which would seem to me to be a good zero carbon option. And instead, they're being led once more into this sort of redistributive agenda. You know, they want to give reparations to poor countries. They want rich countries to give more. They're getting away from the point, aren't they, if they want to turn this into some sort of super way of redistributing the world's wealth between the wealthy countries and the poor countries?
That's always the agenda, I think, that underlies most of the UN's work, because you do have this one country, one value approach. You have this large cohort of small countries that seek to, extract their pound of flesh from those who might be larger or have more. There's also a self-selecting problem, I think, with these COP-type conferences, and that is that those who most enthusiastically sign up to participate, and I don't just mean in the national sense, I even mean in the personal sense, they are the ones that are, hardcore into renewables, haters of gas, haters of nuclear, haters of coal and the fact that it can be efficient, or indeed a very just thing for those in poorer places to be able to access it. And so they bring a mindset to the table that reflects the narrowest of the left here in Australia, and then wonder why it isn't scooped up with enthusiasm worldwide. When anybody who is running a business, anybody who is running a household budget can see the problem and diagnose it from a mile off.